They said human history was too violent to be real. Across the halls of the Intergalactic Research Council, the ancient records were treated as grim fairy tales, exaggerations born from paranoia or fear. No sentient species, they reasoned, could have survived such a relentless spiral of bloodshed and ruin. No civilization could be so reckless and yet thrive. To many, humanity was a myth woven from impossibility. The historians debated in echoing chambers, surrounded by records deemed unreliable. Accounts of ceaseless wars, betrayal spanning centuries, weapons designed not merely to kill but to annihilate entire populations, extinction events, not from nature, but from humanity's own hand. Skeptics laughed it off as primitive storytelling. Surely, no rational beings would invent devices capable of poisoning their own planet, of boiling oceans or blackening skies, simply to defeat one another. At the center of the council, voices clashed with rising fervor. Some argued that if even a fraction of these stories were true, humanity posed a grave threat to galactic peace. Others dismissed the very idea of such creatures existing, calling it absurd, a clear violation of every known pattern of civilization. Violence of that magnitude, they said, would have burned any race to ashes long before it could reach the stars. A resolution formed amid the chaos. An envoy would be dispatched to the ancient ruins of Earth. The planet had long since fallen silent, abandoned in a distant corner of the Orion Spur, shrouded by debris fields and tales of catastrophe. If evidence could be gathered, tangible proof, then the council could finally decide if humanity had ever truly existed, and if so, whether its legends were a warning or a fabrication. The selected envoy was renowned for objectivity, immune to superstition, and detached from politics. Armed with advanced analytical tools, archival access, and the backing of the council's authority, the envoy set course for the derelict blue world. The mission was simple: confirm or deny the bloodstained legend. As the envoy traveled, data from Earth's archives was recompiled and reviewed. Fragmented video feeds showed continents split by lines of fire, skies choked with smoke from endless wars. Documents depicted political ideologies that justified genocides. Journals described battles where soldiers froze to death in trenches, died screaming under chemical clouds, or charged into machine guns because honor demanded it. Images of cities leveled to rubble over disputes of pride or fear or resources filled the screens. There were too many accounts, too much pain compressed into too little time. The envoy read of a species that embraced war so tightly that peace seemed the anomaly. Empires rose and fell within generations, their legacies buried beneath the very soil they conquered. Battles were fought over religion, land, ideas, vengeance, and sometimes for no discernible reason at all. War was not merely a tool for humans. It appeared to be a tradition, a grim thread woven into the fabric of their identity. Yet some anomalies persisted. Among the data, scattered like seeds in a burned field, were glimpses of something unexpected. Treaties negotiated under threat of annihilation. Acts of mercy even amid slaughter. Soldiers who laid down their arms, risking execution to spare civilians. Survivors rebuilding shattered homes not for glory, but simply to preserve life. Still, the weight of violence was overwhelming. The Council's doubts seemed justified. This level of brutality, sustained across millennia, was unparalleled. Other civilizations flirted with conflict, but always recoiled before self-destruction. Humanity, it seemed, danced on the edge, courting extinction with open arms. The envoy ship slipped through the remains of Earth's orbital defenses, long-dead satellites spinning lazily, missile silos rusted and cracked by centuries of decay. As Earth grew large in the viewport, scars marred its surface. Vast deserts where once lush forests grew, oceans tainted with shimmering oil slicks, cities now skeletal ruins clawing toward a dim sun. The final transmission from Earth had been intercepted centuries ago. A simple, chilling message broadcast into the void. We are not afraid. The Council had debated its meaning endlessly. Was it defiance? Madness? A last cry of species unwilling to admit defeat? The envoy knew one thing. Answers lay buried in the bones of this planet. They would descend to its surface not merely to observe, but to dig deep into its past, to exhume the truth hidden beneath layers of devastation. A message was sent back to the Council. Landing initiated. Investigation underway. As the atmosphere thickened and the envoy's craft shuddered against turbulent winds, the weight of human history pressed in from all sides. The blood, the fire, the cries for mercy and screams of rage, they were not just stories. They were etched into the very crust of the earth, impossible to ignore. For the first time, doubt stirred within the envoy's mind. Was this truly the story of monsters or survivors? Was the violence an indictment of humanity's soul, or a symptom of something far more complex, far more tragically noble? Those questions would need answers, and Earth, silent and broken, would whisper them soon enough. The landing site was a wasteland of crumbled stone and twisted metal. No sign of life stirred among the broken remains. The envoys stepped into a dead world, the ground crunching beneath careful steps, every echo a reminder of absence. Scanners activated automatically, sweeping the area for data, mapping ruins that once teemed with millions of human lives. Structures that had scraped the sky were now skeletal frames. Vehicles designed for both utility and war lay rusting in heaps. Amidst the desolation, fragments of humanity's story lingered. Whether murals depicting victories, monuments erected to fallen heroes, rusted weapons clutched in skeletal hands. The evidence was everywhere, undeniable and overwhelming. Analysis drones fanned out, reconstructing shattered cities digitally. As each simulation completed, the same story played out. Towering metropolises built in ambition and toppled by war. Entire civilizations rose, innovated, fought collapse and rebuilt. All in cycles so rapid, it seemed almost deliberate. Humanity's violence had been catastrophic, but so too had their will to rebuild. At the edge of a broken plaza, the envoy discovered a crumbling library. Inside, preserved under layers of dust and debris, were thousands of ancient texts, most rendered illegible by time. Yet scattered among them were survivors, manuals, histories, even personal diaries, recorded in languages once thought lost. The AI translated with clinical precision, piecing together narratives of betrayal, ambition, sacrifice, and suffering. One journal entry stood out. It described a young soldier's horror at realizing the enemy he had been taught to hate was just another frightened boy. They shared a cigarette in secret before dawn, knowing that by morning they would be forced to try and kill each other. Another letter, penned during a siege, pleaded for forgiveness from future generations, from enemies, from the earth itself. Each recovered artifact tightened the knot in the envoy's mind. These were not mindless creatures driven by bloodlust. They were self-aware, haunted by what they did, but compelled by forces they could not easily resist. Fear, survival, loyalty, pride. Further inland, the envoy's team uncovered what appeared to be a battlefield frozen in time. Skeletons lay tangled together, weapons still locked in their death grips. Vehicles were burned down to their frames, and half-collapsed bunkers bore signs of final, desperate stands. Some soldiers had scrawled last words onto walls with their own blood, their messages unreadable but the emotion clear. Scanning deeper layers of soil revealed entire mass graves stacked like pages in a grim book. DNA analysis confirmed the diversity of the dead. Different ethnic groups, different allegiances, all buried together by time, their differences meaningless in death. The envoy felt the weight of the planet's sorrow pressing closer with every discovery. Holographic reconstruction units went to work, restoring a three-dimensional view of what the city once looked like before it became a tomb. Through the envoy's visor, bustling streets reappeared. People selling goods, artists painting on crowded sidewalks, children playing between towering glass buildings. Then came the sirens, then the panic, then the bombs. In a matter of seconds, vibrant life dissolved into smoke and rubble. Watching the simulation unfold, the envoy stood motionless. The sheer suddenness of the destruction was breathtaking. One moment, laughter filled the air. The next, silence. Data from ancient satellites orbiting Earth told a similar story. Wars had once engulfed entire continents. Great armies had marched across deserts and oceans, wielding weapons designed to maim not just bodies, but souls. Yet within the same databanks were records of ceasefires, temporary truces, even alliances born of mutual exhaustion. Humanity had, time and again, clawed its way back from the brink, refusing to die, refusing to surrender to despair. In a derelict research center, the envoy discovered a half-functional archive chronicling Earth's final decades. The logs detailed a desperate, last-ditch effort to halt planetary collapse. Teams of scientists and engineers, once bitter rivals divided by nationality and ideology, worked side by side to develop solutions. New energy sources, terraforming techniques, atmospheric cleansing devices. They had come heartbreakingly close to saving themselves. But mistrust, politics, and old wounds opened anew at the worst possible moment. War erupted again before salvation could be realized. Humanity's greatest chance slipped through bloodied fingers. Standing before the rusted skeleton of what had been a prototype fusion plant, humanity's final dream, the envoy found a plaque still clinging to the entrance. Its inscription was barely legible, but one line remained clear: "In darkness, we choose to build a light." The envoy reviewed sensor readings, cross-referencing atmospheric degradation, seismic activity, and radiation spikes. The conclusion was unavoidable. Humanity had been its own cataclysm. The myths of galactic historians were not exaggerated. If anything, they had been merciful in their retellings. Still, anomalies persisted. Statues of peacekeepers stood amidst ruins of warlords. Temples dedicated to forgiveness weathered alongside fortresses of conquest. Medical outposts had been set up in war zones, treating wounded from both sides. Diplomats died alongside generals, each trying in vain to prevent the collapse. One battered hard drive, painstakingly restored by the envoy's AI, revealed video footage from one of humanity's final peace summits. Representatives, visibly scarred by years of war, sat together in a battered chamber, refusing to leave until an agreement was signed. The footage ended with an explosion, the building destroyed by extremists who feared peace more than war. The envoy closed the playback with a heavy heart. Even at the end, humanity had struggled against its worst instincts. They fought not only against enemies without, but against darker impulses within. The last stop of the day took the envoy to a vast field where white markers stretched beyond the horizon. Each marker represented a life lost not in victory or conquest, but in the hope for a future better than the past. Scientists, doctors, diplomats, children, dreamers. Kneeling by one marker, the envoy touched a cracked stone. A simple inscription read, "We remember, we regret, we remain." Humanity's violence was not fiction. It was a truth carved deep into the marrow of the planet. But so, too, was something else, a yearning to overcome it, to transcend their own blood-soaked nature. As night fell over the broken earth, the envoy understood this investigation would not end with simple condemnation. The truth was infinitely more complicated and far more human. The council grew impatient. Updates from the envoy arrived irregularly, each report painting a more troubling portrait of humanity's past. Skepticism hardened into quiet fear. Some members proposed quarantining Earth entirely, even suggesting sterilization protocols to ensure no remnant of humanity's legacy could ever threaten the stars again. Others, more cautious, demanded a full analysis before passing judgment. The envoy transmitted a direct message: "There's more to uncover. Wait." And so the council waited uneasily. Below Earth's darkened sky, the envoy pushed deeper into forgotten territories. Beyond the shattered cities lay relics untouched by scavengers or erosion. Underground bunkers sealed against apocalypse, research vaults hidden beneath mountains, and deep archives storing the accumulated knowledge of a species that had refused to accept its own end. In one such vault, shielded by layers of dead earth, the envoy found a marvel, a repository of human culture. Not weapons, not battle plans, but art, philosophy, music, and dreams. Paintings preserved behind protective barriers. Books written in dozens of languages, their pages filled with ideas about beauty, morality, destiny. Musical recordings encoded into data crystals, broadcasting melodies so hauntingly beautiful the envoy paused its work to simply listen. The music was not composed in victory or celebration. It was music of loss, of yearning, of hope clawing its way from beneath despair. Even after burning their world to ash, humans had found time to sing about the stars, about forgiveness, about love. Reviewing philosophical texts revealed a remarkable contradiction. Humans were aware, often painfully so, of their own brutality. Entire schools of thought had arisen to combat it. Treatises debated the nature of violence, the ethics of war, the sanctity of life. No other species of council had studied and invested so much intellectual and emotional energy wrestling against itself. One work, heavily cited across centuries, stood out. It posed a chilling question. Was humanity's violence a flaw, or was it the source of their strength, the crucible that forged their resilience? Had their suffering shaped them into survivors capable of facing horrors that would shatter gentler civilizations? The envoy transmitted excerpts to the council. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Some called it dangerous propaganda, a justification for barbarism. Others fell silent, unable to dismiss the raw, unsettling logic within the ancient human words. Further exploration uncovered evidence of the final war, a conflict so devastating that even hardened human generals had described it as a collective suicide. Nuclear winters had swept continents. Genetically engineered plagues had thinned populations indiscriminately. Autonomous war machines, left unchecked, had turned on their creators. But humanity had not simply surrendered to oblivion. Scattered enclaves had resisted the pull toward extinction. Makeshift communities of survivors, cobbled together from former enemies, had tried to rebuild. Small outposts that chose cooperation over domination. Schools reopened not to teach warfare, but to teach healing. The knowledge of old sciences was preserved not for conquest, but for survival. The envoy found evidence of these enclaves across continents. Underground gardens flourishing in darkness, libraries guarded like sacred temples, oral traditions preserving lost wisdom. These were not acts of conquest. They were acts of defiance, not against an enemy, but against their own worst instincts. The records grew thinner after that. One by one, these enclaves had gone silent. Not through violence, but through attrition, environmental collapse, dwindling resources, disease. In the end, humanity had not died screaming on a battlefield. They had faded away, clutching one another, hoping that someone someday would find them and understand. The envoys stood in the center of what had once been a university. Ivy-covered ruins whispered of lectures given in empty halls, of experiments run with dwindling resources, of teachers imparting knowledge to classrooms reduced to handfuls. On a half-buried chalkboard, barely legible, was written a phrase that translators rendered simply. We are more than what we were. Above, the stars burn indifferent in the black sky. Analyzing the final transmissions from humanity's last days revealed something chilling and awe-inspiring. Messages were not filled with rage or vengeance. They were filled with warnings to whoever came after. Messages of caution, urging any future inheritors of Earth to be better, to learn from their mistakes, to not let pride, fear, or hatred dictate their paths. In one recording, a tired, hollow-eyed leader spoke to a camera in what was likely humanity's last official broadcast. We have fought for too long, too foolishly. We forgot we were part of something greater than ourselves. If you find this, know that we tried. We failed, but we tried. The envoy played that recording 3 times before continuing its work. At the core of Earth's oldest city, deep beneath layers of destruction, the envoy uncovered the last monument erected by human hands. It was not a statue of a general, not a commemoration of a battle won or a foe defeated. It was a simple sculpture, 2 hands reaching toward each other but never quite touching. Below it, in dozens of languages, one phrase repeated. In our striving, we lived. This was the truth the council had not expected. Humanity's violence had been real, monumental, and in many ways, monstrous. But it had not defined them. Their history was not a story of monsters who glorified suffering. It was a story of beings who knew their own darkness, and who, in defiance of that darkness, kept reaching for the light. The envoy prepared its final report. Humanity had not died because they loved war. They had died because, despite all their brilliance, they could not overcome the oldest struggle of all, the fight against themselves. But they had never stopped fighting it, not for a moment. As the envoy left the broken earth behind, a single thought crystallized. Humanity's story was not a warning of inevitable doom. It was a testament to the staggering, tragic, and beautiful complexity of what it meant to live with both greatness and monstrosity intertwined. They said human history was too violent to be real. They were wrong. It was all real, and it was magnificent. The Envoy ship broke orbit, leaving behind the ghost of a world that had once roared with life. Transmission to the Council initiated automatically, a direct uplink designed for immediate review. Within minutes, delegates from across the galaxy gathered in silent anticipation. Faces impassive but hearts pounding. They had demanded the truth. Now, the truth stared back at them. The Envoy's report was brutally precise. Humanity had been every bit as violent as legends claimed, and more. Their history was a litany of conflict, a blood-soaked chronicle spanning millennia, where every achievement was marred by betrayal, war, or conquest. But intertwined with that darkness was something the Council had not foreseen, an unyielding defiance, a refusal to surrender to their basest instincts without a fight. The Council listened as the Envoy recounted Earth's cycles of rise and fall, how empires crumbled into dust, only for cities to sprout anew on the ashes, how tyrants ruled, only to be overthrown by dreamers and revolutionaries, how even in their bleakest hours, when extinction loomed, humanity reached for one another, clung to the fragile hope of something better. Delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the rawness of what they heard. Others sat frozen, recognizing in humanity's story an echo of their own suppressed histories. No species was without scars, but humanity wore theirs openly, a tapestry of suffering and struggle woven into every aspect of their civilization. The Envoy's final analysis arrived like a hammer blow. Humanity had not been unique because of their violence. They had been unique because they understood it. They had written poems about it, composed symphonies for the dead, built monuments to peace in the ruins of war. They had not glorified their savagery. They had mourned it. They had fought themselves, over and over, trying desperately to become better than their nature allowed. It was not the violence that made humanity terrifying. It was the knowledge of their own flaws, and the decision to keep fighting against them anyway. The Council chamber fell into a heavy silence. One elder, a being whose species had not known war in thousands of years, spoke first. Her voice was soft but carried through the chamber. They should not be erased. They should be remembered. Another, more cautious, countered. Remembered for what? Their violence? Their nearsightedness? The Envoy's response was immediate and unflinching. Remember for their refusal to surrender to despair, for the fact that in a universe where survival often means compromise of spirit, they chose to dream even as they died. Murmurs filled the air. Some counselors argued that humanity represented a threat to future civilizations, a dark example that violence could be tolerated, even romanticized. Others, quietly but passionately, insisted that erasing them would be a greater crime, the destruction of a story that deserved to be told, no matter how uncomfortable it made them. Ultimately, consensus was reached not by majority rule, but by a rare, solemn agreement. Earth would not be sterilized. It would be preserved. Its ruins would remain untouched, a silent testament to what humanity had been. And more importantly, their story would be recorded in the great galactic archives, not as monsters to be feared, nor as heroes to be worshipped, but as a people who would struggle harder against themselves than any enemy. The Envoy was tasked with compiling the record. Every recovered artifact, every translated word, every haunting melody was to be preserved. Future generations, when learning of the galaxy's ancient races, would learn of humanity not in sanitized summaries, but in their own words, in their own broken, beautiful voice. Later, as the Envoy traveled back through the stars, the weight of the mission lingered. Most species rose to greatness by overcoming external challenges, harsh environments, rival empires, cosmic disasters. Humanity had battled itself, and that war had defined them as surely as any sun defines a life orbiting it. They were a people who could build cathedrals in the morning and burn them down by nightfall, who could create medicines that cured plagues, then invent new weapons to deliver death faster, who wept for the innocents they killed, yet kept marching forward. They contained contradictions vast enough to terrify simpler minds and inspire braver ones. The envoy reviewed a final message salvaged from Earth's dying years. It was addressed not to friends or enemies, but to the universe itself. We are not the best of what could have been. We are not the worst. We are merely what we are, flawed, reaching, and alive. If you find our ruins, know this: we tried. We failed more often than we succeeded. But every step, every mistake, every act of creation and destruction was made with open eyes. We lived knowing who we were, and we still chose to hope. The words were simple. They lacked the polish of grand declarations or political manifestos. But in their rawness, they captured something purer, humanity's final defiance, not against a foe, but against inevitability itself. Long after the envoy had returned, long after the debates had ended, a monument was quietly erected on the council's central world. It bore no images, no statues, only words carved in the ancient dialects of a dozen species. They knew their demons. They fought them anyway. In that, they were magnificent. Pilgrims would come for generations to read those words, standing in silence beneath the stars humanity once dreamed of reaching. No empire would claim Earth. No banners would fly over its ruins. It would remain as it was, a grave, a cradle, a testament. And in the endless night of space, among countless worlds spinning in the dark, the memory of humanity would endure, not for the wars they fought, but for the fight they never abandoned.